Thanks for tuning in. It's another brisk day in the UK, winter. It's been an interesting time, hasn't it? On the good point side, we've got the COVID vaccines that are still being rolled out, probably across here in the UK certainly, but across the world. So we're very lucky. But what we've also got is we've got, as many would have predicted, these vaccine deniers starting to crawl out of the woodwork. So I'm going to keep this short, but I just want to give a couple of other examples, why critical thinking and rational thinking is so important. Because it can affect all of our lives directly. So, as I've said, we've got these vaccines coming out. What a huge scientific and logistical achievement that is. But we've still got these anti-vaxxers coming out of the woodwork. And so I hope to give you some examples about what might be involved in developing a vaccine and why we should believe that evidence and the science. And then secondly, just give you a couple of examples about what I found during my career. I've been lucky enough to be involved in infectious diseases, and a couple of examples of what can happen if we don't use rational thinking. So here's a couple of examples where in the past lack of rational thinking, and I'd also say the lack of an opportunity to have any education has really impacted on people's lives. I used to spend a lot of time doing field work in different countries around the world, and I worked with communities where education wasn't available. And we did a survey. We were studying a disease called leishmaniasis. It's in its worst form, it's fatal without treatment, transmitted by these sandflies. So we wanted to get people's opinion in indigenous people who lived there, how they caught this disease. And it's actually transmitted by these tiny flies that when they bite, they transmit a parasite. But when the survey results came back, it became clear that people just didn't know this. So people thought they would catch this from eating undercooked eggs or undercooked food, or that it was witchcraft or magic, or from bad water. What became clear is, with the available knowledge that was present to these people who are highly intelligent, many of these community leaders, but they didn't just have the facts available to make the right decision. And because of that, it was just unfortunate that they couldn't protect themselves from this disease. So that's the first instance where it's really important to have all the facts available to you before you make a decision, rather than just leap to assumptions, which is our natural human instinct. I also remember when I was, a few years ago, I was very lucky to have the opportunity to do some rafting in the Himalayas in India. One of the raft instructors was a Canadian guy, actually. He was very charismatic. He'd obviously lived his life in the outback in Canada, and he was extremely bright, extremely charismatic, but he didn't have a conventional education. And he was obsessed by health. One of his mantras was enzymes. For some reason, he'd picked up the idea that enzymes that he could eat in a pill would solve all his ills, from backaches to headaches, and he would go on about this for days throughout the whole of the rafting trip. Didn't have the heart to tell him that in the form that he was taking these enzymes, as soon as he swallowed them and they hit his stomach, the digestive tract would have destroyed them anyway. But he was so intelligent, and he'd made this theory, these highly intricate, complex theories, based on the information that was available to him. But the problem is that information was wrong, and because of that, he was living his life and altered his life around this assumption, and it wasn't doing him much good. Now that's a pretty benign example, which didn't affect him seriously, but it can give you just an idea that if you have the wrong information, you can plan your whole life about something that's wrong. guy. And we've also got the great Mr. Trump still going on about how the election was stolen from him and the election was a fraud, even though all the legal cases he's brought have been thrown out due to lack of evidence, because the evidence is there was no underlying fraud or massive fraud. But yet, we've got all these things that are happening that have really stoked all these conspiracy theories, which are really important because they affect people's lives. In these Senate votes, 4 people died yesterday because of, on the base of it, misinformation. There was no fraud, and people have died because of that. And the big one, of course, is the vaccine. So we're very fortunate that we've got these vaccines that are coming out, but you know, these vaccine deniers, why I personally find this so frustrating is that vaccines have saved so many lives. If you look at one of my previous videos, I've put some numbers down, but they've saved so many lives, millions of lives, and protected billions of people. And yet, despite that, people who try and spread that misinformation, stop people from taking the vaccines, and directly cause the deaths or serious illness in people. I find it incredibly frustrating. But I have to say, another part of me is that it's our fault, or the science community's fault, because we're not describing the process enough. So, what better opportunity than to run through a few points now? So let's talk precisely, for example, about how a vaccine is approved and ready to use in people. So, there are up to 5 different clinical phases. Phase 1, the preclinical phase. This is where the approach of the vaccine development is addressed. Experiments, mainly lab-based experiments, to see what kind of vaccine you're going to use. Is it an RNA vaccine, attenuated vaccine? And they're put through the first trials, laboratory trials, to see if they work. That's stage 1. So next comes phase 2, and that's really the initial safety tests. So small scale, up to 20 subjects are administered the vaccine, and the safety profiles are looked at. So how do they react? Small scale, just to test initially if it's safe, what their response is to the vaccine. Phase 3, this is where the study's expanded to up to 60,000 people, the scale at a football stadium full of people. And again, safety profiles are looked at, the reactions to the drug, again looking at safety, responses, how effective the dose is. So it's big. It's worth mentioning that at any of those points, if it doesn't work, someone can step in and close it down. And that's what does happen quite frequently. So you've got all those checks on checks on checks to make sure a vaccine is safe. And that's not even the last part. Then you've got regulatory approval. So on top of all that, all the data from all those studies has to be accumulated, has to be ordered, and then it's submitted to the regulators. So in America, it's the FDA. In the UK, it's the MHRA. In Europe, it's the EMA. So all these different regulatory bodies. And they pour through the data, expert committees, looking through everything, any questions answered. And if the data's not correct or it's not up to scratch, they will not approve it for use. And again, it's another step. And at any point, this can be refused. So again, it's that step after step after check after check after check that really gives us confidence that a vaccine is safe. And even as a final check, what can happen is that years after vaccines are approved, any side effects are reported, encouraged to be reported, for example, through primary healthcare workers, that again can be submitted and scrutinised. So it's constantly under check and review. And that is so rigorous. So I hope that gives some understanding of why we should trust in those regulations and trust in that scientific methodology. So what's the point? What's the point of this? So the point of this really is just to mention that this scientific process of proof and evidence protects us from ourselves, and that is the key message that is important, that was nailed into me by my professors and through my training, is that evidence is everything, because if you haven't got the evidence, you cannot make the right decision about things. So just to finish that off, I think the whole message here is just a reminder that we are not naturally rational, critical thinkers. Humans are emotional thinkers, and the great thing about rational thinking, critical thinking, is that it protects us from ourselves, from our own bias. There's been many times I've done an experiment or a paper's been published in infectious diseases where my inclination is to say, I don't believe that. But I've read through the introduction, the methods, their evidence, and by the end, it's so convincing that you can't deny it. And that's the way it should be. So just occasionally, we can be our own worst enemy. If we don't follow the evidence, we can be affected by those sound bites, by slick statements. They have a big emotional effect on us. So particularly in these times, I'm so glad that we still have, that we do have the scientific process, and that it works, and then we get results, and things move forward. And because of that, we might have a better 2021, and the scourge that is COVID-19 might be under control. And that is because of science, following the evidence, and it gets the job done. So there we go, ramble over. But we're very lucky to live in these times, I keep saying that, where we've got these technologies and these thought processes that are available to us. Long may it continue. So if you do like these videos, as ever, do press the subscribe button, and see you in the next one. Good girl. She's a good girl.